Welcome to Families for Justice News. Today we are interviewing a very well-known and probably the longest serving, can we classify you as an activist?
I'd say
advocate.
Advocate, yeah.
I'd say good, honest Kiwi bloke. That's the best way to put it.
With regards the abuses being conducted by the state under the guise of Child, Youth and Family and Oranga Tamariki. Graeme Axford. Graeme, you've got a book out. Would you like to tell us why you wrote the book?
Yes, the book is called Differently Abled, and part of the reason for that is I've got a severe case of dyslexia, which has proven to be difficult, but there's an upside and a downside to that, and I won't go into too much about what that is because people will have to read the book to find out. But so it's really a two-stage book. It talks about my life with dyslexia, and then it talks about the run-ins I had with Child, Youth and Family and the Ministry of Social Development, who to a certain degree played on my disability. And it continues on in there, so it basically covers my life to date, but also particularly my advocacy, which started off in 1989 and is still going today, and also the path that took and the adventures that followed. So I won't be saying too much about it because people need to get the book to find out more, and I don't want any spoilers, but I will say that the book was 100% sponsored by someone who, when they heard my story, said, you need to do a book. And I said, well, I can't, I've got dyslexia and I can't read and write and spell. And they put me in contact with a ghostwriter and then came back and said, I'll pay for the book. So we've done the book, and the book's being used as a fundraiser because we want to, first of all, initiate a judicial review in regard to the principles of natural justice to do with the Child, Youth and Family, or now Oranga Tamariki's complaint system. And that's because we believe it is inconsistent with natural justice. So that's the first aspect of what we're going to use the money raised from the book for. And the second aspect is to, if there's anything left over from that, and there's two issues with that. One, if we win, we may get our costs back. And if we don't win, then I'll have to pay the other side's costs, which isn't too great. But should there be, by any chance, any money left over from that, then I'll just use that to continue my ongoing advocacy work. And it won't be to pay wages, it'll be just to meet costs of computer stuff, paying people to format my documents, all the travelling I do in relation to helping people. So that's the general idea of the book anyway.
One of the gripes and complaints of most people who have the misfortune to be abused by Child, Youth and Family Oranga Tamariki is the complaints system of Oranga Tamariki. Now, there has been a number of reports previously over the years into the complaint system. Would you like to make a comment about any of those?
Part of the reason why Child, Youth and Family got closed down and was the mess it became is, starting right back to the first decent report I think that was ever written was done by former Judge Mick, and the report, in my view, was spot on. The problem is, none of his recommendations were ever implemented. And there was a succession of reports, I think 14 in total, actually there'd be about 16 by now. And they echoed exactly what he said back in the year 2000. So we've got, what tends to happen is there's a review, a report, a committee, recommendations, then another review, another report, another committee, more recommendations. But unfortunately the government seems a bit remiss in implementing the recommendations. And I truly believe had they done what Mick had suggested back in the year 2000, Child, Youth and Family wouldn't have become the mess that it come, to the point that they had to actually close it down and start again. So my view is that we already know what the issues are. And the latest Children's Commissioner's report, which I agree with, I could have written it myself based on all the other reports and all the other known factors, because what he wrote echoed all the previous reports that were already known about that weren't implemented. So we got to this point of frustration of how many reports do we need? How many reviews do we need? What we need is someone to actually put what we've learned into practice.
Right, well, one of the other famous reports, I think it was in 2010, was the Howard Board report.
Howard Broad, yeah, that was 2013. Now that was interesting. I'll just go back a bit. In 2010 and 11, I went to Parliament Select Committee, having been the first person to ever go through the Chief Executive Advisory Panel. And I believed having the panel as part of the MSD, who also run Child, Youth and Family, wasn't right. Parliament Select Committee actually...
Why wasn't it right, Graeme?
Well, because you're basically running your own oversight.
So it's not independent?
No. Well,
so like, they cooked in the books?
Some could say that's the case. It would be like the IPCA being run by the police. People would have a problem with that.
So that's the Independent Police Complaints Authority.
So what happened was Parliament, to my surprise, agreed with me that that wasn't independent and it wasn't good enough. So my first petition initiated the Howard Broad report in 2013. And Howard Broad actually agreed with me and agreed with Parliament that having the Chief Executive Advisory Panel within the MSD wasn't independent. So what I did is I went to the Ombudsman and said, haven't we waited long enough for the Howard Broad report to be recommended or put into place? He said he wouldn't do anything while the government was considering the report. Well, here we are in 2020. That report, I'm unaware if it's ever been accepted. Apparently the modernisation panel may have looked at it and taken some recommendations out of it, but my point is that here we have got all these years and what Howard Broad knew to be the problem was never put in place. But what happened is in November 2017, Oranga Tamariki took over the running of the Chief Executive Advisory Panel for themselves. So that's a complete opposite direction to what Parliament and Howard Broad said they should go. So now we've got Oranga Tamariki overseeing their own oversight, which is even worse than when Parliament criticised the MSD for running the Chief Executive Advisory Panel and SIF. So what I'm saying is they've gone completely in the opposite direction, which no government should have allowed to happen.
Totally agree. So would you say then that some of the decisions coming out of the advisory panel could be corrupt?
I would
say they definitely get influenced.
I would say there would be a lot to be desired. When you've got the organisation that's being complained about gatekeeping the panel, they can filter complaints, the staff can, before it gets to the panel. And in Howard Broad's report, he made an interesting comment. He said there may be cases where the panel's not getting all the information. Very clearly code for some things they may not know about.
How does this work with regards Jacinda's open and transparent idea of the government?
Well,
I mean, this is a ministry, Oranga Tamariki.
Yeah, it is. And the interesting thing is the Chief Executive Advisory Panel doesn't have its own legislation. So it comes under the powers of the Chief Executive to be able to perform the functions of running the organisation. But what I found is whenever you start to question what information the panel's been given, it's often you're told that they won't tell you because under the professional privilege, or they hide behind the Privacy or Official Information Act, using it as a shield, so that you don't actually know what has been put before them from the other side to know what can be considered. So when you get a complaint, when you get their report back, sometimes you look at the report and you think, how did they come to that conclusion? Well, you don't know because a lot of the information is kept from you, which they've considered. And that should be unacceptable by anyone's standard, you would hope.
Well, the police, which is a very powerful organisation, have an independent police complaints authority. Oranga Tamariki, which looks after our most vulnerable, don't. That isn't independent. Now, that must be very dangerous for the citizens, and especially those young children whose voices can't be heard, and are supposed to be.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact, I've had this discussion with them. They argue that the independence is in the people that they appoint to the panel. So because they're not employees, therefore, and they say they are people of integrity, they bring the independence to the panel, which is what makes it independent. And I have dealt with a number of those people, and they are very, very good people, some of them. The issue I have is the information they're given and the structure before them. So when complaints can be narrowed, and they get to hear what's left of the complaint at their end. When you're a complainant, it feels like you're not being listened, you're not being given a fair go. And people may not realise it, but I was the first ever person to go before the panel in 2009. And that came about with an agreement I had with Ruth Dyson that I would stop protesting if she brought in a proper oversight. Well, she brought in the Chief Executive Advisory Panel. Now, I had to go through them because without having given them the chance to hear my complaint, I couldn't then go to the Ombudsman, because the Ombudsman would redirect me back to them, saying you must go through them first, which is fair enough. So I went through them. We had a good outcome. I can't complain about the report at all. Problem is, the organisation staff refused to implement the recommendations of it. So I went back protesting, and then Brendan Boyle took over from Peter Hughes. And I wrote to Brendan Boyle, and we come to an agreement where again I would stop protesting if I had a second Chief Executive Advisory Panel hearing, which I got. And again, that report was favourable. The problem being, the staff didn't want to comply with their recommendations, and there's actually nothing to make sure that they did. So after that, the person in their care who aged out of care, so I didn't get a third Chief Executive Advisory Panel report, which would have been pointless at this stage anyway, because having been through the system twice and having had it not work, why would you want to do it a third time? And so that's where the problem was. And I should add that I don't have any children. So the person that I was going to the panel for, there wasn't that close connection, because part of the disinformation campaign that's been talked about me is that I'm a disgruntled parent. Well, actually, I'm not a parent. So when they say things like that, you know that whoever's telling you that information is wrong. And also, the whole saga is actually in the book. There's a lot of information we could go into, but it's best people read it. Now, on the topic of the book, one of the staff said to me the other day, anyone can put anything they want in a book, doesn't make it true. A lot of the book's actually based on the evidence that I put before Parliament. The evidence that when the MSD had the chance to rebut it, had it not been true, they didn't. So I can say that about 60% of what's in the book was put in my submissions before Parliament. So when people say there's no evidence of it, there is on Parliament's webpage, because Parliament wouldn't accept something that they hadn't first checked up on to find out if it was accurate.
One of the reasons that people go to the complaints process is to try and get the truth, and also to make sure that those people that have gone out of their way to not give the truth, so their children or the parents were separated for false reasons, are held to account. Now, while we don't have an independent complaints system, there is no way that I'm aware of, unless you can inform me, of how we can get those bad apple social workers out of the system, because clearly the chief executive's not very interested in addressing the issues of fabricated evidence by social workers.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that, because one of the issues with the Chief Executive Advisory Panel, or two issues actually, is first of all they won't look at individual social workers. Howard Broad commented on that and said he believed that was done so it didn't create employment disputes between the panel and the organisation. Second thing is they wouldn't look at affidavits that their staff wrote as put before the family court for the very reasons you have alluded to.
That perjury could be committed.
Well,
could be being committed.
I'd be slightly more polite, because I have to be. They're not accurate, would be a mild understatement.
I'm sure that many of the people going to be listening to this would be far more vocal about the fabricated evidence that's produced by social workers that's then rubber stamped by the family court, where the family court says we don't listen to the parents, we only listen to the professionals.
Correct.
And as you know, as a citizen trying to address the safety of your children or the best interests of your children against Oranga Tamariki, the psychologists, maybe the New Zealand Police, the DHBs, the education, and then the justice system, you're very much a David and Goliath situation.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, I remember one affidavit that one of the social workers put in. The judge said the only thing missing from it was once upon a time. And I thought, when a judge can say that, and then not do anything about the affidavit or the person who put it in, because that's another thing. Howard Broad said in his report, he said that there were powers available to the court to deal with social workers, but they were seldom used. I mean,
Never used.
yes, that would probably be more like it.
And why isn't the Justice Department doing something about it? Because we can't get rid of those bad apple social workers, which there's a number of them. We've tried it through the social workers blacklist. We're looking at hosting it overseas to be able to bring to the attention of the public these very bad people. The steps that the citizens are looking at is protesting outside their houses, and thank you, Mr. Brooker versus New Zealand Police Supreme Court of Appeal, which says we can. Which is the steps that the citizens are looking at, because the MPs are not listening, and the senior management within Oranga Tamariki is not doing anything about making it easier for the citizens to complain about the abuse.
Oh, it's virtually impossible. I mean, Howard Broad, in his 2013 report, said that the organisation needed to do research to address the issues of their staff affidavits, to find out what's the jurisdiction of the court and what's the jurisdiction of the panel, because the panel was saying, well, if we look at staff affidavits, we're questioning the court if they accept them. And it took them until, so Howard Broad said that in 2013, it took them until 2017 to get a legal opinion about how they could look at staff affidavits in a way that didn't affect the family court. My point is 2013, 2017, that's a long time to wait to get that little piece of research. And when I asked them when they got this research, because I noticed the terms of reference for the panel changed, they claimed legal privilege over even giving me the dates when they asked for and sought that research. And for once, the Ombudsman come through and said why the information might be legally privileged, the dates about when it was asked and when it was given isn't. So I've got the dates, but I have no idea what they're trying to hide about what they were asking, where they could intervene on staff affidavits or not in relation to, as I put before the family court.
A simple thing like that. Why would the system want to hide something that should be open and transparent? Wouldn't that be a concern for Jacinda Ardern, our Prime Minister, that talks about open and transparent government?
Well, I agree, it should be.